Today, Matt Walsh Show, Democrats weep as Trump kills narco terrorists and stops violent crime in our cities. These are very bad things for a president to do for some reason. Also, another prominent figure now admits that he was cowed into supporting quote-unquote trans rights. Should we forgive and forget? Cory Booker shocks the world by getting engaged to a woman. And the worst mayor in American history comes out to endorse the guy who will soon be the new worst mayor in American history. Talk about all that and more today on Matt Walsh Show. Here's something fascinating. Until the 1990s, the U.S. government classified encryption as munitions, literally categorizing it alongside weapons. And you know what? They weren't entirely wrong. Encryption is indeed powerful. It's your shield against those who want to exploit your personal information online. And that's why we use ExpressVPN. It's an elegant solution that encrypts your internet connection and routes it through secure servers, keeping your online activity private, exactly as it should be. Think about it. Without encryption, your digital life is an open book. Your internet service provider can legally sell your browsing history. Data brokers track your every move across websites. Government agencies can peek into your online world. I've been using ExpressVPN for years now, and honestly, I wouldn't go online without it. Anytime I'm traveling and need to access sensitive information on the go, ExpressVPN has become the first thing I turn on to keep my data secure. And here's the beautiful part. ExpressVPN makes privacy simple. One tap, and when the app turns green, you're protected. It works across all your devices, phones, laptops, tablets, and a single subscription covers up to 8 devices. Encryption is a weapon, and it's one that you have a legal right to use for your own protection. But it's up to you to exercise that right. If you decide to take action today, you can get 4 extra months of ExpressVPN for free just by using my special link. Go to expressvpn.com/Walsh. It's expressvpn.com/Walsh to get 4 extra months free and start protecting yourself today. You have to imagine there are more than a few panicked conversations going on this evening over at the headquarters of Tren de Aragua, the Venezuelan gang that routinely traffics drugs into this country and takes over apartment complexes in places like Colorado. As you may have seen, 7 months after the Trump administration designated Tren de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization, the U.S. military just blew up one of the gang's drug boats as it sped towards the United States. There was no warning. The Coast Guard didn't try to take them into custody. Instead, the boat and all 11 people on board were bombed and eliminated, presumably with the help of one of the warships that the White House has recently deployed to the Southern Caribbean. After decades of having open access to the U.S., this development had to be quite a shock for Tren de Aragua and every terrorist group that engages in drug trafficking. Until now, the absolute worst-case scenario is that they might get detained very briefly, maybe have to answer a few awkward questions about why they're heading towards the United States on a boat with 4 outboard motors and millions of dollars worth of narcotics. And then some NGO armed with tax dollars commandeered by the Democrat Party would jump into action and spring them loose, as Ivy League academics demanded that we respect the civil liberties of sociopathic foreign drug traffickers. But that's not what happened this time. Instead, the NGOs and academics weren't given any time to intercede on behalf of Tren de Aragua. Federal judges weren't given that opportunity either. There's simply no chance that a federal judge with a name out of a Star Wars movie can issue any kind of injunction at this point, ordering the Trump administration to form a dive team and, go on down there and piece all the dead bodies back together. That's not going to work. We just simply killed them all instead. And as you might expect, our moral superiors aren't very happy about this. Here's how one Princeton professor and self-styled human rights advocate, a guy named Kenneth Roth, responded to the destruction of the drug boat. Quote, "Drug trafficking is a crime, not an act of war. Traffickers must be arrested, not summarily executed, which U.S. forces just illegally did." And there were dozens more posts like this, all of them complaining about the destruction of a boat full of drug traffickers. The Trump administration didn't respond to any of these people. Instead, one by one, the official accounts of various officials and departments in the administration, including Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, the rapid response team, posted the footage of the boat exploding without apology. The White House also posted memes like this one. The caption reads, "Terrorists eliminated, adios." Not exactly a subtle message. But what makes it so effective is that, predictably, no one on the left has any idea how to respond. Their default tactic, which is to stall, file frivolous lawsuits, wage large-scale propaganda campaigns, that simply doesn't work anymore. So instead of accomplishing anything, they're stammering on the internet about how it's supposedly a terrible thing that drug boats are being destroyed. They can't explain why that's so terrible or what negative consequence that will actually have for us. They're aghast at the possibility that for the first time in recent memory, the U.S. military is actually carrying out airstrikes for the benefit of the American people. And the American people overwhelmingly support it. As scandalous as this may be to left-wing, anti-human academics, most Americans feel the way that I do about it. And my take is very simple. Kill the foreign drug traffickers who bring poison into our country. Kill them all. Mass slaughter of the drug cartels. Leave no one alive. That's what I'd like to see. It's what most Americans would like to see. And it is, in fact, the moral and just course of action. Now, the White House recognizes the abject weakness that Democrats are displaying at the moment. And that's why the other day, the president announced that the U.S. military would continue to take action to protect the homeland. The city of Chicago is up next. Watch.
Lined up on Chicago, though?
Well, we're going in. I didn't say when. We're going in. When you lose, look, I have an obligation. This isn't a political thing. I have an obligation. When we lose, when 20 people are killed over the last 2.5 weeks, and 75 are shot with bullets. So let me tell you a little story about a place called D.C., District of Columbia, right here where we are. It's now a safe zone. We have no crime. It's in such great shape. You can go and actually walk with your children, your wife, your husband. You can walk right down the middle of the street. You're not going to be shot, Peter. You're safe.
Now, just so you know, there's nothing, despite what you may have heard, there's nothing unprecedented about using the National Guard to establish order when local authorities prove unable or unwilling to do so. You take the shooting at Kent State in 1970 during riots over the Vietnam War, for example. Four college students were killed and 9 were wounded by the National Guard. And in many schools today, this episode is taught as the Kent State Massacre. Pretty much every university in the country claims that this shooting was a clear example of brutality by the U.S. military. But at the time, the public overwhelmingly supported the National Guard. People understood that these students had been rioting and threatening people with deadly weapons for days. They had burned down a building on campus. They were unruly. They were a clear threat to public safety. They had cornered the National Guard troops and were advancing on them. And, that's what actually happened. And in fact, as recently as 2 decades ago, Chicago's leaders were openly talking about bringing in the National Guard on their own. Here's a report from the Associated Press in 2008, quote, Illinois Governor Blagojevich surprised Mayor Daley on July 16th by offering to send state police or even the National Guard to battle out-of-control crime in Chicago. So there's nothing crazy or unprecedented about what the Trump administration is proposing now. And Democrats realize that, presumably. So in response, rather than construct any kind of rational argument, they're resorting to panicked non sequiturs. Here's one alderman in the city of Chicago making his counter argument, if you can call it that. Listen.
How do you respond to the argument that there were something like 50 plus shootings, 52 people, I should say, were shot in Chicago, 30 different shootings over the holiday weekend, 7 people killed? Aren't numbers like that still a problem that your city needs to address? What more can be done to address that?
Well, I think that what we need to do is we also had a mass shooting in a Catholic school. We also have had many instances where the administration has really escalated, exacerbated the violence in our country, in our cities. Trump is a dictator. I think we got to be very clear. He's trying to normalize violence. He's trying to normalize military deployment in American cities like LA, DC, Chicago, and many others to come. But what we have not seen is really a systemic investment that will actually address the core issues. I had shootings in my ward. One of them was a tragic shooting of an unhoused neighbor. So the Trump administration is saying that they're going to address the issue of unhoused residents by putting them in jails, in concentration camps.
Yes, his very first response when asked about the extraordinary levels of crime and violence in his hometown is to talk about the murder of 2 children in a Catholic church by a trans-identified shooter in another state. This is a trans-identified mass shooter whose demonic ideology was affirmed at the highest levels of the Democrat Party. And yet that's the defense he's offering. Oh, you're worried about the constant shootings in Chicago? Well, that's absurd because our party is also responsible for mass shootings in other states too. Now, if you notice, CNN introduced this guy in the Chiron as a Chicago alderman for ward with large Hispanic population. So apparently we're supposed to treat him as a credible talking head on this particular issue because he comes from a ward with a lot of Hispanics. Even though he uses every single DNC buzzword that he can, he just crams them all in. He calls homeless people unhoused folks. He says Trump is a dictator. He talks about concentration camps. Then he demands a systemic investment, meaning more tax money. So just, he goes down the bingo. He's got all the boxes on the bingo card checked there. You just know this guy goes around saying Latinx on top of all this. So it's a complete train wreck, but this is all they have. Meanwhile, residents of Chicago are being terrorized by repeat offenders who obviously belong in prison. Watch.
13 mugshots of Livingston going back to 2012. A large number of those arrests for aggravated assault and battery of both women and police officers, something Miles found out after the fact.
Like, what is enough? What does someone have to do where they're going to be held accountable?
According to online records, Livingston's history of random acts of violence against women goes back 8 years. In 2017, he was accused of randomly attacking 2 women months apart. Both cases were dropped. In 2022, Livingston was sentenced to 5 years in prison after prosecutors said he punched and attempted to rob 4 women within 20 minutes in the Loop. And yet, just 14 months later, in 2023, while on parole, Livingston was arrested for hitting a woman in the face on North Michigan Avenue. And in 2024, he was sentenced to 100 days in prison after punching a 15-year-old girl, also on North Michigan.
Now, any sane person watching reports like this would realize that Chicago has a major problem. It's not enforcing the law or punishing criminals. So maybe they should start with that. Instead, Chicago's Mayor Brandon Johnson has decided to deflect blame in probably the most pathetic and unconvincing way that he possibly could. Yesterday, he announced that red states are somehow responsible for all of the violent crime in the city that he leads. Watch.
And they've made historic progress. However, we will never be able to end gun violence in Chicago as long as the president continues to allow tens of thousands of guns to be trafficked into our state and our city. The vast majority of guns do not come from Chicago. They are not made in Cook County. They are not bought in the state of Illinois. These guns come from red states. They are coming from Indiana. They are coming from Mississippi. They are coming from Louisiana. And that is the harsh reality. Chicago will continue to have a violence problem as long as red states continue to have a gun problem. Shootings will continue as long as this presidential administration continues to put politics over people.
Yes, the shootings will continue, says Brandon Johnson. He really just said that. He doesn't seem to realize what he just said. He couldn't have made it any more clear that he views the violence in Chicago as a core building block of his political power. He might as well have announced the shootings will continue until morale improves. I mean, that's basically the tone. Think about the logic here. Yes, there are constant shootings in Chicago, Brandon Johnson concedes, but they'll continue to take place if Donald Trump gets involved. So I guess we're looking at what, a wash? Is that the idea? But we get to the absurdity. Before we get to the absurdity of Johnson's underlying argument, it needs to be said that he's changing his position here. Just so you know, just a year ago, when he was asked also about why Chicago is so dangerous and dysfunctional, at that point, Johnson was blaming Richard Nixon, of all people. Watch.
So we cut off the pipeline of boys between the ages of 10 and 19 being either victims or the perpetrators. So, yeah, it is personal. Black death has been unfortunately accepted in this country for a very long time. We had a chance 60 years ago to get at the root causes, and people mocked President Johnson. And we ended up with Richard Nixon. I'm going to work hard every day to transform this city. That's what it takes to build a better, stronger, safer Chicago, and I need everybody to step up.
So we've gone from Richard Nixon being the one at fault from the grave. He's haunting Chicago and causing all the violence. And then we went from that to the idea that guns from red states are responsible, which is quite a pivot. But let's give Brandon Johnson the benefit of the doubt and look into the numbers here. First of all, if you pull up the data from the ATF's website, here's what you'll find. And this is from 2022. It shows where firearms that were recovered in Illinois were originally purchased, assuming that the ATF could make that determination. And as you can see, Illinois is the top source by far. So his state is the top source of these guns. Roughly 7,500 firearms that were recovered in the state of Illinois were originally purchased from Illinois. The next highest states are Indiana and Missouri, which were responsible for 2,500 and 1,000 firearms respectively. And if you add up all the other states in the top 15, you'll find that in more than 50% of cases, the firearms were originally purchased in Illinois. Now, this is not a surprising or significant finding in any way, and it certainly doesn't implicate red states so much as it implicates blue cities. Both Indiana and Missouri, as we all know, are home to many loyal Democrat Party voters. And some of those Democrat Party voters will move across state lines. And the problem isn't the fact that these people are capable of traveling. It's the fact that they're committing violent crimes. I mean, there's a reason why if you look up the top 10 most violent cities in America, 9 out of 10 are led by Democrats. Whether they're in red states or not, as we all know, this is a common deflection from these people. They say, well, look at the violence in red states. Yeah, where's that violence happening? It's happening in the cities. And who's in charge of the cities? The Democrats are. Out of the top 10 most violent cities in America, 9 of the 10 are run by Democrats. That's 90%. So trying to pin this on Republicans is a form of gaslighting that could only be done by the same people who tried to convince us that men can get pregnant. I mean, they are very accustomed to denying basic reality. And so here they continue. Also, here's a question, Brandon. Let's just take the guns that do come into Chicago from red states. Okay, let's pretend that all of the guns. Let's go along with that fantasy that they're all coming from red states. And let's even pretend that not only are they all coming from red states, but they're coming from red areas of red states, meaning the rural areas, not the cities. None of this is true, but let's pretend. Well, Brandon, why do those guns only become a problem once they make it into Chicago? Why do these guns suddenly start killing people in Chicago when they weren't killing people in rural Indiana? Why is that? If the guns are coming from rural Indiana, then we should, and the guns are the problem, then we should see that the violence in Indiana is worse than it is in Chicago, given that Indiana is the source. But that's not the case. It's a strange thing. The guns don't start killing people until they get into Chicago. Do the guns just take on a life of their own? Do they come to life like some rated R version of Toy Story? Or do the actual humans in Chicago decide to use those guns to commit violent crimes, which would mean the problem is with the people in your city, not the objects? Now, this is a concept that obviously leftists struggle to understand, but if you work with them, then sometimes you can get them to understand it a little bit. In fact, I just had this experience with Stephen King, of course, the author, famous author, Stephen King. And after the mass shooting by the trans guy at the Catholic Church, I pointed out that trans-identified people are mentally unwell and doctors should be legally barred from affirming their confusion, like we talked about on the show after the shooting. Stephen King responded to my post by posting this. Trans is not the problem. He had a gun. That's the problem. Now, I replied to Stephen King and I said, I have multiple guns. I've never murdered anyone in my life. Somehow, even with my guns, I have never experienced the temptation to spray bullets into a church. It turns out that if you aren't a mentally ill freak, having a gun isn't a problem at all. And then, get this, Stephen King, in a moment of accidental mental clarity, said, and you see the tweet here, yes, but you're sane. Well, yes, Stephen, that's right. You finally got it. Congratulations, Stephen. You're in your 60s now. Yes, exactly. So you see that it's not the gun, as you originally said in your tweet. It's not the gun, it's the person. Because just a second ago you were saying, oh, no, it's not that. It's the guns. It was the exact quote. It's the guns. And then I pointed out that, well, I have a bunch of guns and I've never killed anybody. I've never even wanted to commit murder. I've never even come close to it. It's just not in the realm of possibility for me. Well, why is that? Well, as you point out, it's because I'm not insane. So it's not the gun, it is the person. It seems we have a breakthrough with Stephen King. Now, if only we could do the same thing with these Democrat politicians, but instead they all play the same game that Brandon Johnson plays. Gavin Newsom has been doing this. J.B. Pritzker has also joined in. Watch.
The president, and let's talk about the press secretary for the president, doesn't seem to understand that it's actually Republican states that have the crime problem. That of the 20 states that have the biggest crime problem, 13 of them are red states controlled by Republican governors. Why is he choosing? In fact, of those 20 states, we're at the bottom. Why is he choosing that over going after a red state that voted for him, rather than a blue state that didn't vote for him?
So once again, there's this conflation of red states with blue cities inside red states, which are, of course, are the real problem. But what's left unspoken here is that in red states, there are cities controlled by Democrats where extraordinary levels of crime and violence take place. And many of these cities have majority black populations or close to it. That's the very inconvenient fact that you're not supposed to talk about. But the truth is, you simply can't explain the disparity in crime numbers without talking about demographics. And when you're talking about demographics, you also have to talk about the fact that something like 80% of black children in Chicago are born to single mothers. If black women in the city of Chicago stopped having kids before marriage, and if black men stopped abandoning their families, the crime problem would all but go away. I mean, just the slightest bit of self-control would fix all of this. But Brandon doesn't want to mention that. I wonder why. Instead, he openly declared an insurrection against the United States government, saying that residents of Chicago should rise up and resist the National Guard. This is just sedition, is what this is, very clearly. Listen.
Are you prepared to defend this land that was built by slaves, a land that was built by indigenous people, a land that is built by workers? Are you prepared to defend this land? The people united will always prevail. I need you all to stand firm, to stand strong. If this president decides to continue to break this Constitution.
Well, before we even get to the sedition, it's just layers of dishonesty that we have here on top of more dishonesty. Chicago was not, for the record, in any sense, built by slaves and indigenous people. Okay, that's just not true. Also, the country as a whole was not built by slaves and indigenous people. That is also not true. We could have never had slavery and this country would still exist. But especially for him to be saying that in that particular city makes no sense. Eastern Europeans, along with Irish and German immigrants, are responsible for the development of Chicago as we know it today. It wasn't slaves from Africa who built the Illinois and Michigan Canal, which is what transformed the city of Chicago into a major hub of transportation and commerce. Slavery was illegal in Illinois. It was immigrants, mostly Irishmen, who constructed it. Useless bureaucrats like Brandon Johnson had no role in it whatsoever. This is back at a time, as we've talked about many times, when people say, oh, we're a nation of immigrants. Well, if you go back a century and a half, if you go back decades and centuries, what you'll find is that there was a time when immigrants came here, people came from other parts of the world to literally help build the country. They built, and these were, this distinction I've drawn so many times, these were really pioneers. There's a difference between what we think of today as an immigrant who comes to an already fully built country in order to take advantage of it, in order to benefit from it. That's one thing. That's what we have these days. But back in the old days, you had pioneers, really. You had people coming and building this place, which is very different from what we have now. And again, it wasn't bureaucrats like Brandon Johnson either. And you know, they shouldn't suggest otherwise or even talk about the development of the city of Chicago until they learn some basic history about their own city. But we all know why Brandon Johnson is lying like this. His goal is to dismantle the rule of law in Chicago. He's been working on that goal for some time. Last year, he got rid of shot spotter technology, which allowed law enforcement to pinpoint the location of any shooting within seconds. Watch.
Well, there's been a lot of concern from city aldermen and community organizations as ShotSpotter is set to expire at midnight tonight. Mayor Brandon Johnson announced today a city request for information to look into other possible technology systems, but many are concerned about public safety while that entire process plays out. After months of contentious debate among city leaders, ShotSpotter gun detection technology will officially stop being used in Chicago tonight. Aldermen voted 33-14 earlier this week to keep the technology system, falling one short of a veto-proof majority. That led to Mayor Brandon Johnson vowing to veto, effectively ending the technology that has monitored Chicago's neighborhoods for more than 6 years.
We hear the mayor talk about building a stronger, safer Chicago, but this doesn't do that when you're taking away this type of technology.
Now, when you hear politicians like Brandon Johnson claim that they have solutions, remember videos like this one. They've gone out of their way to make violent crime much, much worse in Chicago. This is a deliberate effort that they've embarked on. Now, it's true that in our federal system, states are not required to assist the federal government in carrying out certain policy objectives, but it's also true that states and local government cannot actively interfere with the federal government's decision to enforce the law. That is not states' rights. That is treason. Brandon Johnson is openly encouraging residents of Chicago to engage in treason against the United States. And for that reason, Brandon Johnson should be arrested, charged with treason, convicted, and then given the requisite punishment for a capital offense. Will that ever happen? Probably not. But then again, just a few days ago, Tren de Aragua, they never thought that they'd be intercepted as they sped towards the United States on their drug boats. They certainly didn't imagine they'd get blown up without any warning. All indications are that we are entering a new phase of federal governance, one where the U.S. military acts to defend the American people, where false narratives from NGOs are ignored, where criminals are actually punished when they violate the law in public. So who knows? Maybe Brandon Johnson shouldn't be so confident. Like Washington, D.C., which has experienced something like a 50% drop in violent crime since the National Guard moved in, Chicago is about to become a much safer place. The more J.B. Pritzker lies about crime statistics, the more Brandon Johnson commits treason in public, the more obvious it becomes that this strategy needs to be applied to every major American city. Democrats have no response. They have no counter-argument. The safer America becomes, the more they will complain. And in response, every American who's paying attention will recognize their party for what it is. They are the party of chaos, crime, and cartels. And they should be treated accordingly. Now let's get to our 5 headlines. What started as an idea is now the podcast and business blasting through your earbuds. Launching your own business is pretty much on everyone's bucket list, but most people let it collect dust right next to learn a language and get abs. Stop hiding behind lame excuses like, I don't have the skills, I can't do it alone. Turn those what ifs into bold why nots with Shopify backing your ideas. They've got the tools you just need to take the chance. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S. We even use it for our own DailyWire shop to make sure things are running smoothly and efficiently so you can all get the goods You might be asking, what if I can't design a website or I'm worried people haven't heard of my brand? Not a problem. Shopify's got you covered from the start with beautiful, ready-to-go templates that match your brand's style and help you find your customers through easy-to-run email and social media campaigns. And if you need a hand with everyday tasks, their AI tools created specifically for commerce can help enhance product images, write descriptions, and more. Plus, their award-winning customer support is available 24/7 to share advice if you ever get stuck. Turn those dreams into and give them the best shot at success with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/Walsh. Go to shopify.com/Walsh, shopify.com/Walsh. Malcolm Gladwell is a famous author. He's written some interesting books and some other books that were not so interesting. But about 3 years ago, he was apparently on a panel in front of a live audience where he came out in favor of quote-unquote trans rights and defended the idea that trans-identified males should play in female sports. Now, that was back in 2022. And now, 3 years later, appearing on some kind of podcast, he's taken all that back. Says he never really meant it, actually. Here he is now. Listen.
If we did a replay of that exact panel at the Sloan Conference this coming March, it runs in exactly the opposite direction. And it would be, I suspect, near unanimity in the room that trans athletes have no place in the female category. I don't think there's any question. I just think it was a strange. The reason I'm ashamed of my performance at that panel because I share your position 100%, and I was cowed. The idea of saying anything on this issue, I was I believe in retrospect, in a dishonest way. I was objective in a dishonest.
So I guess everybody at this conference in 2022, or most of them, were in favor of trans males and female sports. And Gladwell says that if you replayed that now, it would go exactly the opposite way. Everybody would be on Team Sanity. And he's right. He's right about that. That's probably how it would go. And as for himself, he says that he's ashamed because he was cowed into pretending that he was on board with the trans stuff. Now, a couple quick points about this. I've seen a lot of people congratulating Malcolm Gladwell and saying, "Well, good for you. Good, nice. It's so great that you have the courage now. So you finally have the courage to speak up." Listen, I welcome anyone who's seen the light. If you're going to come, I welcome anyone who says anything true on any topic at all. So anytime you speak up and say something true, I welcome that. And I welcome you onto Team Sanity. But there's no courage here at all. Okay, there's zero courage involved. This was a guy who said the popular thing, at least in his social circles, back a few years ago. And now he's saying the popular thing again. So this is just someone waiting until the thing is popular to say it. There's zero courage involved at this point. Now, there would have been a little bit back in 2022. But even then, again, this is 2022. So even by then, it was like not as we were really winning the battle, even as long ago as 2022. So it would have required a minimal amount of fortitude, not much. Keep in mind, this guy is 60 plus years old. He's worth, according to Google anyway, $60 million net worth. Those net worth things on Google are not always reliable. In fact, usually are totally made up. But he's given that he's just a very successful author and he's written a bunch of books that have been New York Times bestsellers, we can assume that he's worth tens of millions of dollars. So he would have risked almost nothing by standing up and having the correct position back in 2022. He wouldn't have lost any money. He still would have sold his books. So he wouldn't have lost any money. All he would have done is upset some of his rich friends. So it would have made for some uncomfortable conversations and with his friends and some nasty looks. And maybe he gets invited to fewer, to fewer social functions. Maybe he doesn't get invited to the next time there's a conference and a panel. Maybe he's not on the panel. I don't know. But that's all that he was risking. This is not a major risk. And he couldn't even do that. So this is someone who's just an abject, disgusting coward and still is. So we're not going to and the reason why it's worth pointing this out is because he is not alone, obviously. We've seen this now. I mean, this is what's happening, where you've got these prominent people who were all on the trans train 3, 4, 5 years ago. And now one by one, they're all coming over here. And you've got some people over here who are ready to throw their arms and welcome them with open arms. And I got to tell you, I'm not. I mean, again, I welcome you saying something that's true, so that's great. I'm not going to congratulate you. And I cannot forget what you did. I can't forget it. But you are still an abject, disgusting coward. You did the popular thing. You betrayed. You were willing to deny, just to avoid uncomfortable glances, nasty looks, and just to avoid upsetting a few of your rich friends. You were willing to deny one of the most fundamental, basic facts of reality. And you waited until the coast was completely clear to come over here. The level of cowardice that requires is impossible to overstate. Which means that we can never trust you. Like, you'll do it again on the next issue, whatever the next issue is, where the popular opinion, at least among the elites, is something insane. You'll do it again. You will totally do it again. So we can absolutely never trust you again. You have shot your credibility completely, entirely, and it cannot ever be recovered. There are things in life that are like that. There are times in life where you can do something or you could say something and you can never come back from it. That's because you said it, you did it. We can't pretend that you didn't. We can't rewind the clock and make it so that it didn't happen. It happened. You did it. And you revealed something about yourself that remains true even later after you've decided that you're sorry. And there's no humility here either, by the way. This is not the prodigal son story, right? The prodigal son returns, and what does the prodigal son do? He comes back in a state of total humility. He comes back and says, Father, I've sinned against God. I've sinned against you. I'm not worthy to be called your son. If you tell me to sleep out in the barn with the cows, I'll do it. I'm not even worthy to walk into your house again. And I understand that because of what I've done. And in that state of true contrition and humility, his father wraps his arm around him and says, come on in, you're welcome back into our home. But that story would have a different ending if the son had walked back and said, yeah, you know what, I decided to come back, but I might leave again. Honestly, Dad, I decided it didn't really work out this time, but I'll come back and I'll eat your food for a little bit. But next time it strikes my fancy, I'll probably leave again. And that's what we have now, right? That's the version of the prodigal son that we're getting from these people. So we can't forget it. We'll never be able to forget that you people disgraced yourself in this way. And this is one of those times that, look, it's okay to be wrong about things. People are wrong. I've been wrong about stuff. So you can be wrong, and you can change your mind. I was talking about that last week. People change their minds. I've changed my mind on things. But there are some things that you just can't be wrong. There are some issues you just can't get wrong. And if you do, then, again, your credibility is done forever. You can't get this one wrong. Is it possible for men to have babies? Is a man a woman? I mean, that you cannot get that wrong. That's one of those. That's one of those deal breaker situations. Or if you get that wrong, then your credibility is just done. All right. Senator Cory Booker has, speaking of people with no credibility, has announced that he's engaged to a woman, apparently. So her name is Alexis Lewis. And Booker wants to run for president again. He's hoping to get 2% of the vote this time, which would be a 100% improvement over his performance in the primaries last time. So, and he knows that he can't be a 56-year-old bachelor and run for president. That doesn't really work in politics. Even in our enlightened era, it doesn't work. So he's getting engaged just in time, and here are the photos of this happy moment. And as you can see, they are happy. They really, really want you to know that they are happy. They are really, really happy. Actually, like maniacally happy. They are happy to a creepy degree. They are happy in the way that a serial killer is happy when he burns your house down with you inside it. This is, if you looked up the term overcompensating in the dictionary, it should just be these pictures. This is it right here. I mean, this isn't even the right emotion for getting engaged. I don't know what this is supposed to be, but engagement should be happy, but it's a kind of a tender, soft happiness. It's a sweet, personal, intimate moment. They're smiling and laughing like Jim Carrey playing a supervillain in a movie. They're like robots trying to emulate a human response. I am happy. I am so happy to be engaged. That's my Cory Booker impression. It's pretty good. It is amazing that Cory Booker is the first man in history to get engaged to a woman and somehow come off even more gay because of it. He looks gayer in these pictures than he's ever looked. I don't know how that, and I don't say that as an insult, by the way. I would never, I'm saying objectively, scientifically speaking, just like as an objective measure. I think that that's what's interesting about it. Now, Booker put out a statement about the engagement. He says, Alexis is one of the greatest unearned blessings of my life. She's transformed me, helping me to ground and center my inner life and discover the joys of building a nurturing home with someone you love. I'm thrilled to share Alexis and I are engaged. I am savoring the soul-affirming wonder of everyday life with my partner, best friend, and now my fiancé. We are excited for this journey ahead, having so much fun, and feeling deeply grateful for the love, support, and energy so many of you have shared with us. We are truly blessed to be surrounded by such a beautiful community, lifting us in love and commitment. Wow, Cory. Thanks for that. That is a giant heap of... So thank you for that. I have to say, she helped me to ground and center my inner life. What does that mean, Cory? What does that mean? Ground and center your inner life. Tell me what that means. No, I actually want to know. We're not going to move on from this. I'm tired of these empty-headed, soulless, walking greeting cards going around and sputtering out nonsense like this and never being asked to explain it. We got way too many people walking around saying stuff like this, and no one ever says, what does that mean? What are you even trying to express? I have no clue what that means. Please explain. Explain what that means, Cory. What do you mean she helped to center your inner life? Please explain in detail what you mean by that. Was your inner life not centered before? Where was your inner life? Was it not inside you? Was it off in the corner of the room somewhere? Did she find your inner life for you and bring it to you and say, hey, I found your inner life in the corner of the room? You keep misplacing it, silly. Is that what she grounded? She grounded your inner life. I'm not being obtuse on purpose. I don't know what that's trying to express. I don't know what it means to have someone ground your inner life. It sounds like it's like construction. What is she, a contractor? Yeah. The problem here is your inner life isn't it's not grounded and centered. We got to pour some foundation and get that inner life, grounded and centered. Doesn't make any sense. Also, do you really expect us to believe that you have an inner life at all? That's the real problem. What inner life are you talking about, Cory? Somebody who has an inner life never uses a phrase like, she grounded and centered my inner life. If you had an inner life, you wouldn't talk about grounding and centering your inner life. That is a dead giveaway that you have no inner life. You have the inner life of a chair. Okay, you have the inner life of a wheelbarrow full of mulch. No, really, you have the inner life of ChatGPT. You are a human chatbot, but with a lot less computing power. You are an empty, pathetic, fraudulent human being down to your core. Anyway, congrats on the engagement, though. Over the weekend, the media and leftists on social media were trying to spin up a narrative that Trump had gone missing and must be very sick or even dead. And they've been trying this through his whole term to conjure up a health scandal around Donald Trump. And things really went into overdrive over the weekend. And Trump addressed that in a press conference yesterday. Let's listen.
It's sort of crazy, but last week I did numerous news conferences, all successful. They went very well, like this is going very well. And then I didn't do any for 2 days, and they said, there must be something wrong with him. Biden wouldn't do them for months. You wouldn't see him. And nobody ever said there was ever anything wrong with him, and we know he wasn't in the greatest of shape. No, I heard that. I get reports. Now, you knew I did an interview that lasted for about an hour and a half with somebody, and everybody saw that was on one of your competitors. I did numerous shows and also did a number of truths, long truths, I think pretty poignant truths. No, I was very active over the weekend. They also knew I went out to visit some people at the club that I own, pretty nearby on the Potomac River. And no, I've been very active actually over the weekend. I didn't hear that one. That's pretty serious stuff.
I'm glad it's
well, it's fake news. You know, it's just it's so fake. That's why the media has so little credibility. I knew they were saying, like, is he okay? How's he feeling? What's wrong? I said, I just left. And it's also sort of a longer weekend, you know, it's Labor Day weekend. So I would say a lot of people know I was very active this Labor Day. I had heard that, but I didn't hear it to that extent.
Well, he's right, of course. Trump has been more visible, more reachable, more transparent through his first 8 months in office than Biden was in 4 years cumulatively. Not even close. Trump is constantly doing press conferences, interviews, speeches, and so on. That's how he's always been. That's how he continues to operate. Even while he had supposedly disappeared for 3 days, he was still putting out posts. He put out that post where he was complaining about the contractors who worked on the Rose Garden. This is while he was supposedly deathly sick or something. Now, granted, I wouldn't put it past Trump to be on his deathbed moments away from expiring and yet still complaining about the shoddy work done by his contractors. I wouldn't put that past him. And I say that with respect. That's that's the great thing about Trump. But anyway, he's not on his deathbed. He's doing fine. And I just want you to think about the shamelessness of the left here. They covered up and lied about Biden's health for 4 years. They gaslighted. We could see the guy falling apart in front of us. We could see that the president was in a state of decomposition. We had a president who looked like he'd been excavated. Okay, he looked like he was dug out of the ground by grave robbers. And we could all see that. We could all see and hear and we hear that he couldn't speak. He couldn't string together 2 coherent sentences in a row. And they still gaslighted us. They lied. They told us everything was fine. And then the moment their guy's out of office, now all of a sudden they're super concerned about the health of the president. Biden went weeks without being seen. Right? He gave like 2 press conferences his entire term. Trump goes a day and a half without being seen on camera over Labor Day weekend. And they treat it like it's a national emergency. Totally shameless. And this is exactly why I say that we need to take full advantage of the power we have right now and do everything we possibly can to advance our agenda, no matter what. All the concerns about, well, if we do it, then the left will do it. All that stuff, all those concerns are bunk. They're nonsense. And as they are proving once again, they will do whatever they want to do, regardless of what we do. They don't need us to establish the precedent. They don't need our permission. They're going to pursue their goals and push their agenda and fight dirty every step of the way. You hear even people like conservatives now, they've expressed this concern about Trump using the National Guard. They say, well, if Trump does this, then what if the Democrats go in and do it? If Democrats are going to do that, they're going to do it. They don't need us to, they're not looking at us and saying, well, we're only going to go as far as they went. That is not how Democrats operate. So if they feel like they want to do that, they'll do it. And they did in fact do that. I mean, they militarized Washington, D.C., if you don't recall, for a long period of time after January 6th. So they're not waiting for precedent. They're not waiting for permission. And so we should just ruthlessly pursue our agenda, throw caution to the wind. All right, finally, before we get to the daily cancellation, this is something I wanted to mention, something non-political. Actually, I want to stick up for someone or a couple of people, a few people. So maybe you saw this viral video. It's a video from Hershey Park a few days ago, and it's a terrifying moment when a young boy, looks to be about 3 or 4, is seen walking on the tracks of the monorail at this park, 100 feet off the ground. And the monorail is, I guess, one of those sightseeing things at the park, goes along above the park, and it runs on a singular rail, hence the name. And this boy was walking on that rail by himself. Apparently, the boy got separated from his parents. He'd been reported missing just a few minutes before this. He wandered away from his parents somehow, and in the span of just 15 or 20 minutes, he ends up walking out on this monorail that was closed, but apparently not blocked off well enough. And here's the video. Watch.
Keep walking.
Stop! Keep going! No! No! Keep going! No, this way! Yes! Oh my God.
So thank God the child was fine. He was unhurt. A man jumped up on the roof of the snack bar there and then onto the rail and grabbed the kid. Apparently the man was not the kid's father, just a concerned stranger, a good Samaritan. Unfortunately, it turned out okay, with no help from that crowd, by the way, shouting very confusing and contradictory commands at this child. It's interesting to see the dynamic between the sort of confused, panicked mob and then the one decisive guy who decides to go up and actually do something about it. Meanwhile, you have this mob of people yelling these commands. Stop, keep going. No, go that way. No, go that way. And this kid's up on the rail. In fact, you even hear the guy running, the guy who had the camera, the guy that was filming this, says at one point, stop, keep going. What do you mean stop, keep going? So you want me to stop going or keep going? What do you want? But anyway, it turned out fine. Nobody was hurt. And then a couple days later, another viral story, sort of similar. This time it's a 5-year-old boy. So another boy, a boy in both of these stories, unsurprisingly, who left his parents' house early in the morning by himself and walked to Chick-fil-A, which was apparently down the street. And then the cops showed up because the Chick-fil-A called the police. And let's watch that.
We arrived on scene. Hello. Hello. And as we walked in, we see a little kid sitting at the table eating his breakfast with one of the managers. Hey, buddy.
Oh, look at that.
We asked where he came from, and he kept saying he walked to Chick-fil-A.
You know where your house is, right, honey?
It's right across the street, right over there.
Okay, cool.
I have children, and the first thing you get that knot in your stomach because somebody else who's a parent is missing their child.
Are you going to show us where you live?
Yeah.
Okay. We gathered him up. Look at that. Say thank you.
There's a cow for you.
I walked him to the back of my patrol car.
Are you going to get me in jail?
No, I'm not going to put you in jail. And we started checking the area. All right, buddy, where's your house at?
We were wondering where did this child come from.
Is it right here?
None of these doors are open. None of these garages are open.
I don't live in a duck pond.
So then he explained that he had a white fence.
That's where it is.
Right here?
Yeah.
And that's when we pulled up in the driveway.
Okay, so they returned the child to his parents, who didn't even know he was gone. They thought he was still asleep upstairs in his room, and they were shocked, as you can imagine. But everything turned out fine there, too. So fortunately, in both cases, the kid was not hurt, although could have been. And here's what I want to say about both these stories. And I don't know anything about the parents in these cases. There's been a lot of criticism of the parents. A lot of the commentary on social media that I've seen about these two viral videos has predictably been all about how the parents are extremely careless and incompetent. What kind of parent would let their kid wander off like that? Only a very, very bad parent would have a child walking on the monorail at Hershey Park or walking into a Chick-fil-A by himself. And look, I get it. I understand that point of view. I used to feel the same way. I'd see or hear about a child who ends up in a very precarious or dangerous situation like this. And I would think, wow, what awful parents. How negligent do you have to be that you managed that your kid was able to do that and you didn't notice? But I have learned to be much more understanding. I have learned that this kind of snap judgment of parents is unfair. So I'm going to stick up for the parents in these stories. I don't know anything about them. Maybe it'll turn out that they're total deadbeats and then I'll look stupid for defending them. I don't know. I mean, I have no clue. All I will say is that you don't need to be a deadbeat or a bad parent to end up in a situation like this with your kid. What I've learned through 6 kids is that you will get way more blame or credit for the natural temperament of your child than you deserve. And so much really does come down to your child's natural temperament, their personality. Not everything. I'm not saying the parent's job is unimportant, obviously. The parent can do quite a lot to determine what kind of person the child ends up being, but there is still natural temperament. So if you're a parent and you have a child who would never in a million years run off at Hershey Park and climb up on the monorail or escape your house at, 6 a.m. to go to Chick-fil-A, then good for you. But that's got nothing to do with your parenting skills. I got to tell you, if you're looking at that and saying, my kids would never do that. Well, good, but it's not because you're a good parent. I'm not saying you're not a good parent, but it's got nothing to do. Like you're give yourself a pat on the back, but you don't really deserve that pat on the back. You just ended up with a kid who isn't as adventurous as that. And I say this as someone who had 4 kids who were not as adventurous as that, as these boys in these stories. Pretty adventurous. I mean, all my kids are, but not like that. And so I'd hear a story like this even after 4 kids, and I would think, man, what terrible parents. And then we had our twin boys, numbers 5 and 6, and they come along. We've already, by the time they were born, we'd been in this parenting game for over a decade, and we'd had 4 kids, which by modern standards is a lot. And so we felt pretty good. We felt like we kind of had this thing figured out. And now we have these boys, and they're exactly the kinds of kids who would do something like that. I look at that video and I go, oh my gosh, I could see that happening. I can totally see them doing that if they could get away with it. They are extremely adventurous. They are very, very curious, totally fearless, love to climb stuff, love to explore. And yeah, they're the kinds of kids that would end up in a viral video. We have to put a lot of deliberate effort into making sure that they don't do something wild like that. Now, most kids wouldn't do those things because they're too scared. Most kids would not do that. Like if you have a kid who's never wandered off, never walked out of the house by himself, that kind of thing. Well, that's just most kids wouldn't do that because they'd just be too scared to do it. But some kids have a curiosity and a sense of adventure that overrides that fear. And that could be very good. It can be a very good thing in the long run. You can harness that. It can lead to, a wonderful and fulfilling life when you have a kid who's like that, has that. I mean, that kid when I'm looking at that Chick-fil-A video, that's a kid that kid can go places in life. Now, but in the meantime, he's going to go places you don't want him to go. But if you can keep him alive for the next, 15 years or so, that's a kid that could go be a world beater. But it's the keeping them under control in the meantime. That's the hard part. And this is the one thing I've learned. Like I said, every child is different. And if there's a parenting challenge that you haven't had to deal with, well, that's probably because you just got lucky. And it's not because you're the greatest parent on earth. It's because your kid just doesn't happen to have that tendency or that personality. And again, not that there isn't a lot parents can do, but to determine what kind of person your child ends up being. But personality and temperament, to a large extent, will be whatever they are. And I see this, and when you have a lot of kids, you start to see this. because we have, with 6 kids, we've got kids who are very adventurous, some who are a little bit less so. We have kids who are more cautious. We have kids who are huge extroverts, kids that are a lot more introverted. And all these kids were raised in the same house by the same parents in the same way, identical upbringing. Everything's the same sort of like punishments. Everything's the same, and yet they end up being wildly different people because that's what you're doing as a parent. You're raising human beings who make choices and have personalities, and that's what you run into here. So that's my, word of encouragement for the day. If you're still stressed about back taxes, maybe you missed the April deadline or your books are a mess, don't wait any longer than you already have. The IRS is cracking down. Penalties add up fast, 5% per month, up to 25% just for not filing. But there is help. Tax Network USA can take the burden off your shoulders and stop the spiral before it gets worse. They've helped thousands of Americans, whether you're an employee, a small business owner, or haven't filed in years. Messy books, no problem. They've seen it all and know exactly how to clean it up. With direct access to powerful IRS programs and expert negotiators on your side, Tax Network USA knows how to win. You get a free consultation, and if you qualify, they may even be able to reduce or eliminate what you owe. More importantly, they'll help protect you from wage garnishments or bank levies. So don't wait for the next IRS letter. Call 800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Walsh. Talk to a real expert at Tax Network USA. Take the pressure off. Let Tax Network USA handle your tax issues. As you know, this year we're celebrating a decade of Daily Wire, not by looking back, but by launching what's next. First up, Monday, for the first time in years, we're bringing in brand new Daily Wire talent with the premiere of the Isabel Brown Show. Then, next Wednesday night, the main event, Friendly Fire. All of us getting together to do what friends do, argue, debate, and probably smoke a few Mayflower cigars. Don't miss the premiere, because during Friendly Fire, that's where we're going to be dropping the good stuff. New series, new projects, huge announcements, surprises we've been holding back until now. This is the start of our next decade, and you don't want to miss a single moment. Join us now at dailywire.com. Now let's get to our daily cancellation. Just a few weeks ago, it seemed like Zohran Mamdani was a shoo-in to be the next mayor of New York. Residents of the Big Apple couldn't get enough of his plan to freeze rent, nationalize the grocery store, defund the police, cure monkeypox, provide free puppies to the homeless, as long as the homeless people aren't too hungry, I guess. He seemed untouchable, at least up until the moment that he tried to bench press 130 pounds. And that moment, if you trust the polls, may have created something of a likability crisis for Zohran Mamdani. One new poll suggests that if it's a head-to-head between Mamdani and Andrew Cuomo, meaning the other candidates drop out, then Cuomo would win by double-digit margins. So while things are still looking pretty good overall for Mamdani, he needs a little boost at the moment. His momentum is flagging. He needs a pick-me-up. And right on cue, that pick-me-up has arrived. And that's because one of the worst mayors in American history, and easily one of the most repulsive politicians to ever hold any kind of political office at any level in this country, has just announced his endorsement of Zohran Mamdani. Yes, Bill de Blasio, who tried to sell the COVID shot by eating fries and licking his disgusting fingers on camera, who murdered a groundhog as children looked on, who transformed New York City into Gotham City by suspending legal consequences for most crimes, has just come out in support of these socialists from Uganda. Specifically, Bill de Blasio is impressed by Mamdani's plan to provide a bunch of free stuff, because after all, free stuff has no downside whatsoever. You give it to people and their lives get better. And the best free thing that Mamdani wants to provide in Bill de Blasio's mind is free buses. Yes, in a city where the subway system is overrun by schizophrenic drifters, Bill de Blasio is fond of Mamdani's plan to provide free buses for everyone in all 5 boroughs. Watch.
Free buses.
And who runs that?
The city of New York runs it, just like we run so many other services. And the bottom line here is to think about the free buses again. Free buses has been proven to work in many parts of the country.
Where?
I'll get you a list of cities, but the bottom line is it is something that allows people to, one, reduce their costs, which people are overwhelmed by,
right,
to get into mass transit more. It works because we know that if people are given a quality alternative they can afford, they'll use it.
It's not really a question of whether Mamdani's staff desperately tried to prevent this endorsement from happening. That's a given. The real question is how they went about doing so, only to fail. The only rational conclusion here is that Bill de Blasio is going rogue. Maybe he actually wants Cuomo to win, and he's doing his part to prevent New York City from falling into socialism and total collapse. After all, this is a man who just wants to eat Shake Shack and, lick his fingers like an ogre. Doesn't really want socialism. In other words, Bill de Blasio, seeing no political future for himself, has become a hero to all New Yorkers. He's falling on his sword. And we should all respect that. At least that's how I choose to interpret this. And if you doubt my interpretation of this endorsement, let's think about what Bill de Blasio is saying here. It's so obviously ridiculous that he can't possibly mean any of it, even if his IQ hovers around 75, which I'm sure it does. First, he announces that he's a huge fan of the free buses idea, and then he makes it clear that he can't provide a single example of a city where free buses have worked. He suggests that he'll have to get back to the anchor about that. Yeah, I'll get back to you. But I can think of a few cities where free buses have not panned out. Kansas City is one of them. This is from the New York Post recently, quote, Kansas City's $50 million experiment with free bus fare is hitting the brakes because the city can no longer afford it. The Midwest city used federal COVID-19 relief money in 2020 to become the first in the country to institute free buses, but local funding dried up and riders and conductors slammed the buses as unreliable, filthy, rolling homeless shelters. Now that phrase, rolling homeless shelter, is actually something that you'll hear a lot when you look into the history of free buses in the U.S., which I did last night because I had some time on my hands. In fact, that exact language was used in Austin, Texas back in 1989 when they experimented with free buses. Here's a report from researchers in Sonoma County on how that turned out. Quote, an experiment with free transportation in Austin, Texas between October of 1989 and December of 1990 found significant issues, not the least of which was that buses became rolling homeless shelters. The larger transit systems that offered free fares suffered dramatic rates of vandalism, graffiti, and rowdiness due to younger passengers who could ride the systems for free, causing numerous negative consequences. Vehicle maintenance and security costs escalated due to the need for repairs associated with abuse from passengers. The greater presence of vagrants on board buses also discouraged choice riders and caused increased complaints from longtime passengers. In other words, the promised reward, fewer cars on the road, did not materialize, and the costs of operating the public transit system increased significantly. Well, who could have seen that coming? Give these people another 5,000 years and they'll discover, why stores like Costco sell memberships, or why housing projects in every case, are extremely dangerous and unpleasant places to live. It turns out that if you want to maintain order, if you want like a nice, clean, civilized environment, you need some degree of exclusivity. You need to be able to exclude people. If it's just a thing where you leave it open to everybody with no exclusion, then that thing, whatever it is, will fall immediately into chaos and disrepair. In fact, I just made this point yesterday about voting. The same goes for voting. And Mamdani should know this very well because even though he's a moron, he did start a pilot program for free buses in New York about a few years ago, and it failed. This from the New York Post once again, quote, Mamdani, who's made free bus service citywide a centerpiece of his mayoral campaign, was behind a 2023 state pilot to bring one free bus route to each of the 5 boroughs. He later co-wrote an editorial in The Nation declaring that continuing to make buses free in New York is more attainable than you might believe. But the MTA's own assessment was far less glowing. The 30% jump in ridership came mostly from people already riding the bus, not new low-income commuters the program was supposed to help. Service slowed, and the pilot program, which ended August 31st, 2024, still managed to run over its $15 million budget. In other words, even without serving many new customers, the project somehow managed to be too expensive. So I guess the idea is that Mamdani just has to raise taxes on New Yorkers even more until everybody with a bank account has fled to Florida. And at that point, you lose the free buses, assuming they haven't been torched or turned into rolling toilets by that point, which they will. This gets at the biggest problem with free buses, of course, which is that they aren't actually free. The taxpayers are forced to foot the bill, whether they're using the bus or not. And in the end, they get nothing out of it. Instead, they receive more decay, more waste, and yet another reminder that New York is incapable of self-governance. Unless each bus comes equipped with its very own full-time Daniel Penny, this is an idea that simply cannot end well, and everybody knows it. And to his great credit, Bill de Blasio, in his own special way, is trying to warn us about all this. Sure, he won't say it out loud, but if you read between the lines, it's obvious. He's a double agent. And now he's been activated. And that is why, for once in his life, Bill de Blasio is worth paying attention to. His endorsement of Zohran Mamdani is a clarion call to every New Yorker. It's an unmistakable alarm bell. It's a bat signal, if you will. It's a window into what New York will look like if Mamdani ends up winning. And it's the kind of message that only a complete buffoon like Bill de Blasio could possibly deliver. And it's also why everyone who's mocking Bill de Blasio for promoting Mamdani's free buses in New York City, a proposal that will inevitably result in the creation of rolling toilets, as it did in Kansas and Austin, is today canceled. That'll do it for the show today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Godspeed.
Hey there, I'm DailyWire Executive Editor John Bickley.
And I'm Georgia Howe, and we're the hosts of Morning Wire.
We bring you all the news you need to know in 15 minutes or less.
Watch and listen to Morning Wire 7 days a week, everywhere you get your podcasts.